went violent. It was unplanned. Shops were looted. People were bruised and people were beaten up. The demonstrators went right through the Osu. So you know where the demonstration occurred. For those of you who know Accra, the Osu Labadi Road. So you come down towards, after the Osu police station, all that way towards Osu Castle was choked with the demonstrations. There was routing, there was tie burning and all of that. And all of that was to say to the colonial authority that prices of goods and services are too high. Sergeant Ajete and Corporal Atipo then went to present the petition, and it was in presenting the petition that Sergeant Emery shot them, and they died. Then when they died, the demonstration took a completely violent turn. It went up in the roof, fire all over the place, and the colonial authorities didn't know what to do. A curfew was imposed. They sent a telegram to London, and London said, we know who is responsible for the demonstration. It is the following people. The people who call themselves United Gold Coast Convention. Dankwa is their leader. Nkrumah is the general secretary. William Oforiatta is part of it. Obeche Belamte is one of them. Grab them. So these men were arrested, and that's how they became the Big Six. Okay, so you can't tell the independence story and exclude Nii Kwabena Boni. His role may have been minimal, but his role triggered it. So Founders Day is for the recognition of people like Nii Kwabena Boni. You cannot talk about independence, as Akosua Pebi said, and that's the teaser we played for you. Play it again. Professor Akosua Pebi talked about Nkrumah telling her father in London when they were having lunch about his return to Ghana. And Nkrumah said that Dankwa Grant had paid money for me to come. So Pa Grant was the moving force behind the first political party, the United Gold Coast Convention. Why was the UGCC set up? The UGCC was set up to be a political party in opposition. Really, that's what it was set up for. The colonial government was the government. So the UGCC people felt that if we are going to talk about independence, we have to set up a political party and have shadow this, shadow that, shadow this for that, have a leader, have a leadership structure, so that if the colonial authority said, okay, so independence, what do we do? Who are we handing over to? It will be easy to hand over to the United Gold Coast Convention, which was the only political party registered at the time, brought everyone in Ghana together, and were leading the struggle. That's how it was going to be until the UGCC got divided in terms of philosophy, of Dr. Dankwa talking about, let's set a timetable for independence, and he wrote that independence should occur 10 years after the 1947 rout. And he wanted independence to occur in a slightly different way. He wanted independence to occur like the Sudan and like the United States of America. He wanted the Declaration of Independence to be written to the colonial authority, because Dankwa was a lawyer and he was looking at a legal regime. So his argument was that the Bond of 1844, which was the first connection between Gold Coast and Britain, had run for 100 years and it had expired. And so there was no contract between the British, and therefore independence should be declared. He also made the point that the 1925 Gettysburg Constitution talked about when Ghana can be independent. When the question was asked by people like Reverend Christian Baita, Casely Hayford, they asked these questions in the Legislative Assembly of 1925, long before the UGCC was born. And then in the 1925 Constitution, they discussed the fact that Ghana or Gold Coast will be ready for independence upon a certain threshold, economic threshold, education threshold, and all of that. It was based on this that Achimota School became a product of the 1925 Constitution, and then the Achimota area was taken by compulsory acquisition, etc., etc. So that was what happened. So Dankwa then thought that, let's say to the British that, okay, so we are here. All the thresholds have been met. The economic threshold, education, all of that have been met. So we're proceeding with the Declaration of Independence. That was one philosophy. He felt that that can happen within 10 years of the 1948 rout and the 1947 event. So he predicted that let's do independence in 1957. Later on, he revised it to 1954. But then there was another argument. There was an argument of Nkrumah and his group who felt that let's have independence right now. You're not going to have independence over the next 10 years. There's nothing to do. We don't have, there's no preparation. That's why Nkrumah coined those things that said that we prefer independence in danger to servitude in tranquility. For those of you who study political science, you can remember that Nkrumah said, and we used to joke about that in Legon a lot. Nkrumah always said that, he said it, that we preferred independence in danger to servitude in tranquility. And he was referring to Dr. Dankwa's argument that let's wait for 10 years and build our society. 10 years from now, we should be fully ready for independence. He didn't like that. He said independence is the most important thing. Let's get it now. Whether we are ready or not is not important. Let's just get it. Okay, and then that narrative carried a lot of oomph. That narrative carried charisma. And so that narrative won the day. And that's how Nkrumah became the hero of the day. And then the British noticed that the penchant for independence among the Gold Coasters was high. And so, in September of 1956, the British passed the Gold Coast Independence Act in the British Parliament. It passed through the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and it became a law. And then Ghana, the government of Ghana at the time, then decided to choose the date for independence, which was fixed on 6th of March 1957, a recommendation from Dr. Dankwa following 6th of March 1844, when the bond of 1844 was set out. So in our documentary, you will see what we talk about, 6th of March and 4th August, the difference between them and the similarities among them. So 4th August is not a day for the big six, no. That's not our view of the matter. I don't think the people who thought about 4th August as a holiday today, the celebration of Founders Day, think of 4th August as a day for the big six. It's not a day for the big six, including the big six, yes, but it includes people like Ahuma Okanse, it includes people like Saba, Yasantoa, Osajiman Prempe, and all the others. And then there's Mabel Dove Dankwa, who was one of the leaders who really did very well for the independence struggle. She was married to Dr. Dankwa, and later on, she became a CPP activist. This was Osei Tutu I, the founder of the Asante Kingdom. And on Founders Day, we remember people like that. Osei Tutu I, whose incarnation was Osei Tutu II, the current Asante Hine. But this was the young man who, together with Okomfo Anokye, wrote the Federation of Ashanti, which became an important pillar in the struggle for Ghana's independence and in the victory achieved for Ghana's independence. This is John Mensah Saba. Now, you can't talk about the Founders Day, or you cannot even talk about Gold Coast becoming Ghana and independence without the efforts of John Mensah Saba. Saba it was who led the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, a kind of group, not political as such, but a kind of civil society group at the time. And Saba made a strong and successful and enduring argument that in Ghana, land belongs to the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. Why did he make that argument? One day they woke up in 1897, and the British Colonial Authority was passing a law that all lands in the territories of Britain belongs to His Imperial Majesty at the time, the Crown in England. Every land, unoccupied land in Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya, Australia, New Zealand, all lands in the territories of Britain should be vested in Her Majesty or His Majesty the Queen, the British Crown. So all of us, subjects, receive this instruction from Britain. That is why those of you who know a bit of global history, the Argentina and the Falkland Islands, when we were younger, we didn't understand why land so close to Argentina will belong to Britain. The United Nations held that the land belongs to Britain because the Falkland Islands land must have been subject to the 1897 land bill that was passed across. The problem in Zimbabwe, the same thing. The 1897 land bill, all unoccupied land anywhere in the world of the British territory shall be vested in the Crown, and all of us were expected to endorse it. John Mensah Saba stood against it. He made a successful argument. He flew to London. Well, he didn't fly those days, they don't fly. He shipped himself to London. And at that time, he was a lawyer called to the English bar, so he could appear before English courts. He went to challenge the law. So it's similar to today, government passes a law, you go to Supreme Court to challenge it. So the British government has passed the law. Saba went to court to challenge it. That in terms of Gold Coast territory, you cannot really say that, because here, there is no unoccupied land. The fact that there's nobody on the land does not mean the land has no owner. The bill said unoccupied and ownerless land. And Saba said there's no ownerless land in Ghana. That in Ghana, by our culture and our tradition, land belongs to three groups of people: the living, the dead, and the yet to be born. The British High Court upheld the argument and decided that the land bill cannot operate in the Gold Coast. And that is why we don't have the problem Zimbabwe has. That's why we don't have the problem Zambia has. So no land here can be said to be unoccupied. That is why lands began to be occupied by families and people own it and all of that, bringing us all the way to the conversation about Achimota Forest, if you like. But that's another conversation. But that's the situation of land in Ghana. Nigeria picked that up, and they also had the same thing. So you cannot exclude a man like John Mensah Saba. He died young. He stood tall for the struggle of independent thinking, for the struggle of taking the colonial master away, and he began to sow the seeds of that. On Founders Day, we remember John Mensah Saba, after whom one of the halls at the University of Ghana is named, Saba was a great man. This is Nii Kwabena Bonney. I already talked about him. Nii Kwabena Bonney was the reason why we had the rout of 1948, and subsequently we had the Big Six, and subsequently we had the CPP forming in 1949, and subsequently we achieved independence. And we had, what, 3-4 elections before independence, 1951, 1954, 1957. It is true that Ghana's independence began on a divided note, but that's the reason why 60-something years later, we have to set up Founders Day so that we come back on an even keel, so that people who contributed can feel that they are also part of this. It's not just a one-man show who did it. That the record does not even support that. There are those who had believed that before. I hope they don't believe that anymore. All right, that's Nii Kwabena Bonney. And then there is Tetteh Quarshie. How can you talk about Ghana without Tetteh Quarshie? It's not possible. So on Founders Day, we remember people like Tetteh Quarshie. What did he do? The man went to Fernando Po on his own stuff. He came back and brought a seed. And he said the seed was not in Ghana. He brought it. Then he went to a Cropon land and said that, let me plant the seed and see, what will happen. He planted the seed, and that's what is called cocoa. Tetteh Quarshie brought it from Fernando Po. Ghana became the largest producer of cocoa in the world for many years. Until now, we are still one of the top 3 producers of cocoa in the world. And cocoa has, until recently, been our biggest foreign exchange earner. Cocoa is also a significant foreign exchange earner, even if it's not the biggest. Cocoa has educated so many people. Cocoa has had Cocoa Marketing Board scholarship. Cocoa clinics have been built. Cocoa has done so much for this republic. Would you call Founders Day without mentioning the name of Tetteh Quarshie? So Founders Day is for people like that. That's why I say it's not about the Big Six. It's about people who have done significant things that we cannot forget. And there are some that we don't know. There are some that we will discover later. And there are some that we'll see as time goes on. And as we get them, they all become founders, part of the Founders Day celebration. So on Founders Day, we are celebrating people who have contributed significantly, like Tetteh Quarshie. All right, this is Mabel Dove, one of the early writers in this republic. She wrote so much, and at that time, the writing in journalism was all about deconstructing the colonial edifice. That's why newspapers were published. Every newspaper, whether it was the Statesman of Dankwa, whether it was the Evening News of Nkrumah, they were writing about deconstructing the colonial edifice. That was the main problem that was facing the nation. Mabel Dove was very, very instrumental in that. Of course, she was married to Dr. Dankwa. Later on, she joined Dr. Dankwa's opponent, the CPP, and became quite active in the CPP as well, still writing. Mabel Dove is remembered during the independence struggle. Susan Ofori-Atta was a very clever woman. She was one of the first bright women to emerge in academia, and she also contributed, working together with Nanase Ofori-Atta. I'm not sure whether it's her father or her brother, but working together with Nanase Ofori-Atta to join the struggle and the voices and the narrative against the colonial authority. Susan Ofori-Atta is remembered on a day like this. Nancy Chibu's photograph is not here, but Nancy Chibu was a vociferous CPP member of parliament since 1951, when Dr. Nkrumah decided that some seats be reserved for women. Nancy Chibu was right there, and then she worked very hard as a member of parliament. She was a key anti-corruption crusader. Of course, Nana Yaa Asantewaa is well known as part of the Gold Coast and Ghanaian story. Nana Yaa Asantewaa is the Ohima of Juso, who fought gallantly against the British colonial authority and achieved global status when eventually the history was written. Nana Yaa Asantewaa is one of those who remember. Of course, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was the main trigger for independence. He had the power of sloganeering. He had the power of organization. Nkrumah wrote somewhere and said that organization decides everything. He had the power of organization, and he had the power of communication. And he was able to communicate to the youth what his agenda was. He was able to sell people into his agenda and get them to work with it. Eventually, independence was achieved. But the credit to him is that forming the CPP in 1949, the CPP won the 1951 elections, they won the 1954 elections, won the 1956 elections, the one that occurred just before independence. And so he built a very effective election machinery. It's sad to see the CPP today the way it is, but Dr. Nkrumah built one of the most effective political winning machineries of all time in the African continent, and that the BBC voted him as the African of the century. So yes, he was a trigger to independence. Obechebe Lamte was one of the lawyers who constructed the laws, the constitution of the United Gold Coast Convention. Before we know that is Jake's father. Obechebe Lamte was from Accra, and so he lived in Accra, and he felt the colonial authorities' misdoings, if you like. And so Obechebi was active in that. But some of them, because they had a practicing portfolio as practicing law, could not deliver themselves full-time to the independence struggle, and that eventually was a problem. Of course, this is Dr. J.B. Danquah. A lot said about him, not much to say anymore. Let me move then to Edward Akufo-Addo, who was a member of the Big Six, and he was also lawyer for the group, working with them. Later on, he became Chief Justice under he was a Supreme Court judge under Dr. Nkrumah, and then later he became Chief Justice. Eventually, he became an executive president under the Second Republic. This is Ebenezer Akwa Adjei, whose history is also quite interesting. Akwa Adjei is a member of the first cabinet that was ever formed. Also a man from Osu, you know, they named the area after him. Akwa Adjei later became interior minister. Of course, circumstances meant that he had to go to prison. He had to go to trial. He was accused of high treason during the Teria Adama field trial. He was accused of being one of those who facilitated the shooting of the Osajefo in Kolongungu as Minister for the Interior. Sadly, Akwa Adjei went on trial and he was released, but then he was not a very happy man. He lived the longest, I think, of the Big Six. Akwa Adjei lived the longest. He died when Flight Lieutenant Rawlings was president. He lived very, very long. And this is William Ofoyata, who was also a member of the Big Six. Later on, he became a minister in the Second Republic, and later on, he ran for president in 1979. So we're going to show you a video now, 15 or 16 minutes, that gives you the conversations about the Founders Day and how it's supposed to be seen from our perspective. You can send us a text messages as you watch the video. Tell us what you want or what you thought should have been in it, or tell us if you think that the whole Founders Day is unnecessary, or you think it is necessary, but it shouldn't be a holiday. Whichever opinion you have, just send it to Good Evening Ghana Official. We'll be talking about religion, and I'd like to isolate the Pentecost Church because it was the first authentic Ghanaian church created. All the churches had come from abroad, and then there was African traditional religion. But the Pentecost Church was an authentic one. So we will give you a history of how the Pentecost Church started as part of celebrating Founders Day. So quite a bit to talk about tonight. It's light, it's soft, it's about Founders Day, but yeah, if he has to get feisty, we'll get there. Alhassan Bello is also on standby to report the latest to us in what's happening in Al-Qaeda, but we are dressing down tonight. Me especially, I'm dressing down tonight. It's a casual moment. Okay, let's see the documentary that we put together for you for Founders Day. It's 16 minutes long, and the narration is by Michael Kataina.
Other men have our land.
As we talk of Saba, we can't forget that Saba and the ARPS were well funded by the wealthy Gold Coast businessman Wilson Say, who was a wealthy trader in 1897. Thus, the political enterprise of the ARPS was homegrown and locally funded as far back as 1897 in Ghana. That's something to make us proud of our history. August became important again 50 years later, 50 years after the ARPS. Before then, the ARPS led to the National Congress of British West Africa, which was led by Casely Hayford and Hutton Mills, and they forced the colonial authority to stop arbitrary governance and govern under constitutions. So the constitutions of 1916, 1925 and 1946 were all set up upon the work of Casely Hayford, Kwabena Sechi, Sir Akukosa, Hutton Mills, and others. Then in 1947, Dr. Dankwa emerged, now fully established as a politician and philosopher, having worked with Sir Akukosa and others, set up on 4th August 1947, under the funding and guidance of George Grant, the United Gold Coast Convention, the UGCC. Grant called on Dankwa to achieve this.
He saw that there were so much trouble everywhere, so he wanted the white people to go away. He wanted to sack them. So he called Dankwa and asked him if he could get about 6 lawyer friends of his so that they could sit down together and discuss. I remember some of them. I remember Kwaje, Obichabelamte, Lawyer Blay, Lawyer Williams. They had the meeting at Father's house in the dining room, and we always, the children in the house, when we saw these people coming, big people coming, we line up on the veranda just to see them.
Here in this photo taken on the date, and dates 50 years after the ARPS on 4th August 1947, the UGCC had been born. So, as Wilson Say was to John Mensah Saba, Pa Grant was to J.B. Dankwa, men dedicated to the struggle towards eventual self-government. So, 6th March is a date for 2 events, the date for the Bond of 1844 and the date for Independence Day in 1957, whilst 4th August is date for the establishment of the ARPS and that of the UGCC.
Well, the Bond of 1844 was probably the first formal grant of power to the colonial government then to exercise jurisdiction within certain coastal areas. I mean, a much smaller area than the then Gold or what emerged as the Gold Coast, among some certain Fanti chiefs, you know, including, if I may say so, a great grandfather of mine, Nana Otu of Abra. Probably more important for present-day purposes is the date on which the agreement was reached, the site of 6th March, which was later to be taken as our Independence Day.
So that is the Bond of 1844. The case for recognizing history and historical figures towards Ghana's eventual independence is best made by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah as he spoke to Parliament on the day that he moved the first independence motion, called the Motion of Destiny, in July 1953. In the 30th paragraph of the speech, as captured in Nkrumah's biography on page 198, he said, quote, "Mr. Speaker, in calling up our past,
Metro TV, insightful, and inspiring moments.
Has Christianity always been one of the religions in the world to you?
Oh, hallelujah. Praise God. Christianity is not a religion, neither is it a joining of a church and doing